It's not going to be long that Halloween is going to be on us. We've already seen, that season starting to come up. You see the decorations around our neighborhoods starting to show up where everyone wants to put the scariest things they can find on their house. And you see around this time of the year, people, they plan for going to a haunted house or having a haunted house or doing things of that nature. We want to do things that are scary. We even, may go to see scary movies and things because at this time of the year, we look at how can we have the scariest experience. But when we look at Halloween and we look at, it's make-believe stuff. It may make us jump a little bit, but we understand that it's not really scary stuff. It's just someone dressed up, or it's some decoration. It's something that's not real. But tonight, as we continue to work our way through with our daily Bible readings, we've been going through the Gospel of Mark. And our readings the reading has us right now, the schedule has us on working our way through that gospel account. And within this past week, you would have read about a particular instance that would have been really scary to be a part of as one of the disciples. Tonight, we're going to be in Mark chapters 4 and 5. And in the context here, earlier on in chapter 4, the disciples have been listening to parables. They've been having them explained. And at the end of the day, in chapter 4, verses 35 and 36, it says, "On that day when evening came, he said to them, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and the other boats were with him." And so, after he spent this day teaching in parables and stuff, he says, "Okay, let's go to the other side of the sea." And he gives them this instructions, and they sail off into the evening, sail off into the night. Well, these are experienced fishermen. They know they know what to do on the water. But while they're on the water, a storm comes up. Well, you'd think a group of experienced fishermen, at least some of them being experienced fishermen and being on the water, this is not going to be anything new. They've experienced storms before. They've been in adverse situations. But this one's a little different. Picking up in verse 37, it says, "There arose a fierce gale of wind. The waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up." And so you've got this really, what would be a very scary storm. Luke chapter 8 and verse 23, in Luke's account, he points out that they were in danger. So this is a dangerous situation. This isn't just any storm. This isn't just some rough waters. This is going to be a long night. This is going to be frustrating. We're going to have to deal with it. But these experienced fishermen are afraid. And all the while, Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. Well, that's some peace in the midst of a storm. To be in a storm that scares experienced fishermen. Either that or he's an incredibly heavy sleeper. But he's asleep in the midst of this storm. These waves that are so bad, they're coming over the boat. They're filling the boat up. And so you can imagine that the boat is rocking around, and here's Jesus just sound asleep through all of it. Kind of a rough situation that he's able to sleep through. But there he is, asleep. And they woke him up. And this is where we find out that that they really are afraid here. These experienced fishermen, they wake him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing?" This is a life or death type situation in their mind. This isn't a normal storm. This isn't a normal night to be out on the water. They are afraid for their lives. "Don't you care that we're dying, teacher?" And they wake him up and they're upset. Keep in mind, again, these are men who are experienced on the water. And they likely expected Jesus, we're in the middle of this situation. You need to be up throwing water out of the boat. You need to be helping us row, helping us sail. You need to be doing what's necessary so that we don't die. And that's probably what they expected that he was going to do whenever when they wake him up, to jump to attention and to begin to get to work like all the rest of them. But that's not what he does. He takes a pretty unique course of action here. Instead of helping to throw the water out of the boat or helping to row or helping to do whatever would be needed with the sails, well, he begins to talk to this storm. He doesn't help as expected. Instead, he just tells the storm off, "Hush, be still." Now, that's probably a pretty unique sight for these disciples. Never heard anybody do that kind of thing before. But then the sight of it worked. That's something that wouldn't have been experienced before. He tells the storm to be quiet. He rebukes the storm, it says. He rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. And so just then, they've been afraid for their lives. The waves are crashing over the boat. It's filling the boat up. They're afraid. "Teacher, don't you care that we're dying?" And now all of a sudden, they're on a sea that's as smooth as glass, because Jesus told it to stop. You've got experienced fishermen who have been scared for their life, but notice what it continues on. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? You still have no faith?" Or in Luke's account, he asked them, "Where's your faith? What are you afraid of?" At that point, I can imagine, one of the disciples maybe wanting to say, "What do you mean, what are we afraid of? Didn't you see that storm? What are you afraid of?" They're there in the boat with the one who created the sea, the wind, and the storm. What are you so afraid of? Seems like a weird question. I remember the first time I heard a tornado siren when we lived in Oklahoma. That's a new kind of fear. That didn't come from a place where we had tornado sirens. When we first moved to Oklahoma several years back, I remember being told, whenever there's a tornado warning, you'll hear this siren. It's time to go get in the cellar. When the first time that went off in the middle of the night, it didn't take any time at all to wake up. That was a storm that scared me like I hadn't been scared at another point before. We've got to get the kids, and we've got to get to a cellar quick. Why are you so afraid? Because they thought they were going to die. Where's your faith? Implying that they shouldn't have been afraid. After all, they're in the boat with the one who created everything. When we're with Jesus, we don't have to be afraid. But what I find really fascinating is what comes next. In verse 41, it says they became very much afraid. They were afraid of the storm, but when Jesus rebuked the storm and it stopped, it says then they became very much afraid. Who is this one that has the power to stop the storm, that has the power to talk to creation and it obeys his voice? They became very much afraid. Who is this that we've been following around? That he can talk to nature and it listens, obeys. They became very much afraid. Was their reaction to Jesus after he calmed the storm? They're still learning who it is that they're following around, that they're listening to. They've been listening to him teach parables and explain them, and now they get a much more up close and personal view of just who he is. That he can command the wind. He can command the sea, and it obeys. Scary night's not over yet. They've just been through this really chaotic, scary ordeal. And as you can imagine, after the sea becomes calm, and they begin to recognize who Jesus is, and a little bit later on when they come to land, I don't know about you, but if I'm one of these men, I'm going to be looking for when can I get a little bit of rest and kind of decompress from all of this, but that's not what happens. After such a scary, chaotic night, they landed in the last place that you would want to land. It was either at or very near a graveyard. And it's not an empty graveyard. There's someone who lives there, and it's not a caretaker. They have come across a lunatic who has demons, and he's headed right for them. If I'm one of the disciples, I might be thinking I'd rather take my chances back in the boat again. Because this isn't just an ordinary crazy person. This is someone that we see in the text. It tells us, and we're going to read this in just a moment. He was very strong. Let's begin reading in verse 1 of chapter 5. They came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. And when he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. And he had his dwelling among the tombs. And no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and the mountains and gashing himself with stones. Imagine this sight. Here comes this guy who's so strong, they can't bind him, they can't chain him up, they can't imprison him because he just breaks out. He's got demons that are controlling him. It says he's screaming day and night. So this crazy guy who is too strong to be bound comes at them. He's shrieking like a lunatic. He's cut himself up, so he's bruised up, bloodied up. He's been gashing himself with stones. And in Luke chapter 8 and verse 27, you want to make it worse, Luke's account says that he wasn't wearing any clothes. You want back in the boat yet? Let's go back to that storm. Now they're out of the boat and they have to deal with this guy. And Jesus engages him. You know, if I'm one of the disciples, I'm thinking, don't engage him. Let's keep our distance. And picking up in verse 6, seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him, and shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." For he had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Jesus engages this guy, and there's some things that we learn here that are important as we look at the way that Jesus talks to this guy. That, we see people sometimes, and unfortunately, we want to write people off sometimes. Oh, they wouldn't be interested, or they're too far gone. I suspect that none of the people that we've come across and maybe judged a little bit too hastily would have anything on this guy. But Jesus engages him. And what we see is that there is no one who is beyond the help of the Lord. There's no one that Jesus doesn't have the power to take care of. Even those that we see as the most hopeless or too far gone, they're not for Jesus. And this man with the legion of demons is the perfect example. Verse 10, he began to implore him earnestly not to send them out of the country. And there was a large herd of swine feeding nearby on the mountain. The demons implored him, saying, "Send us out into the swine that we may enter them." Jesus gave them permission, and coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them, and they were drowned in the sea. The pigs the demons get cast out into a herd of pigs that then stampeded into the sea. What a sight to see. Talk about a rough, chaotic night. But to be fair, this could have been the next morning after they've landed. We don't know exactly the amount of time. It doesn't tell us that's elapsed at this point. But they've just dealt with this storm that these experienced fishermen are afraid of. Jesus has told the storm to be quiet. Now they're very much afraid. They land, and this crazy guy with the demons comes up to him, and Jesus just kicks the demons out. That would get your attention. And I imagine that even though it's not recorded, they may still be thinking, who is this guy? Like we saw at the end of chapter 4. Who is this? That even the wind and the sea obey him? Now he's casting out demons. This guy that nobody can bind, now he's sitting there in his right mind, it tells us, and we're going to read in just a moment. Who is this guy that can do these things? Afraid yet? Well, that gets the attention of the people in town. It says the herdsmen ran away and reported it in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed, sitting down and clothed in his right mind, and the very man who had the legion. And they became frightened. It doesn't say that the disciples are frightened at this point, but whenever the people who know this legion, they know about the people who are out there keeping the pigs, they know all of this stuff that's going on, they see what's happened. Now the people in the surrounding country, they're afraid. Who is this guy? They're afraid of him, and they began to implore him to leave. Somebody who has more power than the guy that we couldn't subdue. The guy that everybody else is afraid of, and he's put him back in his right mind. Please leave, they ask him. The man got his life back, and he was given a job. A Verse 18, as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed was imploring him that he might accompany him. But he didn't let him. Imagine that. Jesus told the man not to follow him because he's got a job for him. And here's a man that has a story. We talk about, there are a lot of people that have some really good stories. Jesus, the Lord helped me. He saved me from this, got me out of that. Here is a guy that has a good story. Imagine listening to him tell this story about what he had been through, being demon-possessed, living in the graveyard. Everybody else is afraid of him. And now here he is in his right mind. Jesus gives him the job. Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you. You think this guy that everybody's been afraid of showing up in his right mind and saying, God did this for me, that's going to get attention. That's going to get curiosity. That's going to get people wondering, who is this Jesus? Who is this man with such power? Who is this man who's able to do such good things? Who is the man that has authority even over the spiritual realm? He went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. I think that idea that everyone was amazed, I think that might be a bit of an understatement. Again, thinking about this man's history, thinking about what he's been through, thinking about who he's been and what he's been possessed by. And now here he is proclaiming Jesus is the Lord. And he fixed the problem. In Jesus, we see the man who can command, God in the flesh, who can command the wind and the sea and the waves. The one who can command the demons, who can command the spiritual beings, and they have to obey because he's got authority over them. Imagine the disciples would need a good night's sleep after all they've been through in this instance. And although there's a lot here that would cause someone to be afraid, what we see in both instances is that as you're following along with Jesus, there is no need to fear. There's a lot here that people would be afraid of, but there's no need to fear with Jesus. He calmed the storm. He cast out the demons of the man who was possessed. He can handle whatever you're dealing with. He can handle whatever problems you have. He can handle whatever scares you. He can handle whatever you're afraid of, whatever you might be anticipating, whatever anxieties you may have. He can handle it. And there's nothing too big or too small that he either can't handle it or that he wouldn't care. There's no need to be afraid with him. In Philippians chapter 4 and verses 6 and 7, Paul even tells us that we're to bring what concerns us, to bring our anxieties to him. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. You look around at the world today, you look at your situation. What scares you? Give it over to Jesus. We see the disciples having to go through a really scary night, but what you see in both of these instances, when they're out on the sea and when they're there among the tombs with this demon-possessed man, Jesus had the ability to deal with it. He had the authority to deal with it. And the message for us is that whatever we're going through, Jesus has the ability to deal with it. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, Jesus said, "Do not fear those who kill the body and are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." There's a lot of things that we think of as scary in this world today. But with Jesus, we don't have to be afraid. We see on the news the wars that are going on in other parts of the world and wonder, what if that comes here? What if it does? Trust God anyway. Jesus can handle it. We look at the state of things going on in our own country. What if the economy collapses? Well, seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and He'll give you all the things that you need. That doesn't mean all the things you want. He'll take care of you. We have that promise in Matthew chapter 6. What scares you? Turn it over to the Lord. He can handle whatever it is. As long as we're faithful to Him, we win the victory. What if things take a more of an ugly turn in this country? What if we begin to see persecutions right here in our own backyard? Give it over to Jesus. Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10, in the letter to the church in Smyrna, that church was about to deal with that very issue. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison, so that you'll be tested and you'll have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I'll give you the crown of life. As long as we're faithful to Jesus, we don't have anything to fear of what this world can throw at us. It doesn't mean it would be pleasant, but we know where we stand with God. Following Him doesn't get us out of difficulty. It doesn't get us away from all the scary situations. You know, Jesus didn't say, because you're following me, there's a storm coming. Why don't we go around the sea? But He took them right into the middle of the storm, and He demonstrated in that storm His power and His authority. He didn't navigate them around the graveyard where this crazy demon-possessed man was. They went straight to Him. And those disciples were there with Jesus as they walked right into both of these scary situations and saw that Jesus had the ability to take care of all of it. As we follow Christ, we're going to deal with difficult, scary, some really rough situations sometimes. But our Lord can handle it. It doesn't matter what it is, our Lord can handle it. The one who can command the sea can handle your troubles. The one who can cast out the demons can handle what you're afraid of. The one who has the authority to put a man who was possessed and crazy back into his right mind can take care of whatever ails you. Let's turn it over to Him. There are a lot of things in our world that we might be tempted to be afraid of. But with Jesus, we don't have to be. We're going to offer an invitation in just a moment. If you're afraid of something, if there's something that's been concerning you about what's going on in your life, about what's going on in this country, about what's going on even in your family, we invite you to bring that to Him tonight. Or tonight, you have the opportunity, if you're not a child of God, to become one through obedience to the gospel. If we can assist you in some way, we invite you to come right now as together we stand and sing.